We stay with the issue of attacks on infrastructure and transport infrastructure this evening here on ENCA. Apart from the attacks on trucks, today marks 2 years since the 2021 July Unrest that swept across two provinces, namely Gauteng and KwaZulu-Natal. On the loss of life, 350 people were killed, while businesses and infrastructure badly destroyed. Many say the provinces, especially KZN, have actually not recovered to date. State-owned insurance entity, the South African Special Risk Insurance Association, you'll know it as SASRIA if you prefer the acronym, paying out billions of rands in claims, all due to what we saw on this day 2 years ago. Well, the association's executive manager, Muzi Dladla, making time for me this evening. Muzi, good to have you with us on the show as well. So you've run out of money. Is this the problem?
We did at some point run out of money, technically almost insolvent, but we are really back on our feet now.
So if you're back on your feet, why are you telling us this evening you're not going to cover further issues like this?
We are, actually. I'm not sure if you're making reference to the grid failure, which was something that we spoke about a few weeks ago. We did retract because SASRIA is actually there to cover gaps in the market. So we needed to go back to the National Treasury to have a talk to them about it, because they are the last insurer of resort at the end of the day. So we are an extension of them. So at this moment, definitely, yes, we are. We would cover that.
So you cover blackouts. What about protests?
Yeah, we cover protests. I mean, that's exactly what we do. So we don't do traditional insurance. We cover riots, public unrest, terrorism, riots and strikes. That's what we cover.
What's it done to your risk profile? I'm curious, because I would imagine 2 years ago, if you and I sat here 2 years and 1 week ago, we would never have imagined something like this happening in KZN. What's it done to your risk profile?
Oh, absolutely. It has tainted it quite a bit, because actually, all the things that SASRIA did prior to that, so any insurance company needs to ensure that it has reserves that are adequate enough to cover any potential risk. So your scenario plans that you do need to be quite spot on for you to be able to do that. And your maximum probable losses calculations, SASRIA had done all of that correctly. The only thing really that we did not necessarily anticipate was the breakdown in the risk mitigations, particularly in the lines of defense. For instance, police not responding as adequately as we would have liked, according to the panel of experts report. So I think that's the one thing that really put a strain on us. So we have looked at that again. We are in talks now with the private sector and the state as well, because there are two levels of intelligence that we were getting were quite really not the same.
Yeah, they were very confusing, weren't they? So you, as SASRIA, you're having to hedge against the inability of government and state to do their job. Is that correct?
I think it goes deeper than that. The private sector, because it's in the interest to protect, they have intelligence, and the state had some intelligence as well. So what we're doing, because we sit in the middle, remember, we cover the risk ultimately at the end of the day. So bringing the two forces together, the public and the private together, so that we have an integrated management approach with the intelligence, because it is the intelligence that informs how we respond, how the individuals, how communities respond, and how the police respond, and at what point do you bring in the army?
Who has better intelligence, state or private?
I don't think I'm in a position to state, but I think
who's giving you more money?
Who's giving us more money?
State or private?
The private sector is the one that provides us with the revenue that we rely on. So we don't get, obviously, as an insurance company that is licensed, any money from government other than equity whenever there's, like you saw what happened now. So we rely a lot on the private sector. So the private sector has got a lot of intelligence, particularly the individuals like the retailers. They move stock around, and that's their livelihoods. So you'd expect that they have a high level of intelligence. So there's a lot of intelligence that lies with the private sector, absolutely.
How concerned are you about the build-up to elections 2024? You were saying earlier that there's scenario planning, there's scale planning. How worried are you really?
Not really too concerned necessarily about that, because we have had every year it happens that there will be some a little bit of unrest there and there, but not particularly as that trigger. The one thing that we'd be worried about or concerned about would be an event that is similar to the one of July 2021, one that is faceless, that is not necessarily has a date that one could be triggered by various things that we don't really have control over as an entity. So we're not really too concerned about the election necessarily. It happens every year. We know how to manage it to a certain degree.
Well, elections every 5 years, I think, is what you mean. Yeah,
yeah,
but the tension every year. But how do you try and scenario plan for that? If we didn't know what was going to happen this day 2 years ago, how do you know scenario plan for something that you don't have a date for and you don't have any planning for? How do you, as an insurer, plan for something you can't plan for?
Yeah, it's a difficult thing to do because you're not insuring static property. You know, you're insuring behavior of individuals who are disgruntled. So the only thing you do is you need to understand where your risk is. You know, super important to make to understand where it is, the homogeneity of your risk, where you are concentrated highly, so that you are able then to, whenever there's an event that takes place, to direct the resources in terms of mitigation of that risk, so that you are able to a very large extent protect the risk where it is. I think that's one of the biggest drafts that we're running now, so that we're able to do that. In addition, obviously, because those are ex post, there are ex-ante activities that needs to take place, you know, like the issue of the social ills that we have in South Africa, all of those other factors that are contributing to this.
Is it more expensive to be insured by Sastria now than 2 years ago?
Absolutely.
How much?
It is. I would say on average it's about 56% more.
Up
on
from
average.
2 years ago?
Up from 2 years ago.
Have you lost clients?
Not necessarily.
Kept the same clients?
We've kept the same clients. There are some clients that have trucks that we've seen a bit of decline. I think that's the only category of risk where we've seen a little bit of decline. But
despite
overall,
what we saw in Van Rieden's this morning, trucks are bailing on you.
Oh, exactly. And that is why trucks were the ones that had the highest rate increase, because exactly of the risk profile is extremely high. Even in July 2021, it started exactly, quite coincidentally, it started similar to how it happened now, today, where the N3 trucks were torched.
Almost a trigger there, isn't there? I feel like you and I had this discussion 2 years ago. We both sat here going, hang on.
We did.
We feel like we know where this is going. I hope this is not the case. Obviously, we hope this is not the case. Can you take another hit like July 2021? You just told me at the start of our conversation you've recovered, you were almost insolvent. Can you take another hit like 2 years ago?
Not to the same degree. Absolutely not.
So if it happened, you'd be broke?
If it happens, we would be broke to the same magnitude, I would say. What I can say is, looking at our balance sheet back then, I think our risk-bearing capacity was in the region of around 18, 19 billion rands. We are slightly above that now in terms of risk-bearing capacity. But obviously, we were hoping that we would have a chance to build it up at least to proportions where we could multiply that at least by 2. Then we know that should something like that happens, and obviously with our models that we're doing now of integrating the state with the private sector, the mitigation is expected to be a lot more.
How do you not have more money? You just told me you're charging somewhat of 56% more based on 2021 July. How don't you have more money?
But Gareth, you should know this. We're an insurance company that does not get a budget from the state. So we build our reserves based on returned earnings. So we've only had a year of earnings. Last year, we had a loss of 26 billion rands. Wow. So you don't recover from that in a year. We need a couple of years to recover, because I don't want to call it a bailout, because it's not really a bailout for us, because it's not a matter of lack of governance that we were in the situation that we were. We were in the situation that we were because of various other factors that were outside of our control. So the state put us back in the position that we were before. So in other words, it puts us first to be a going concern. So meaning that you meet your minimum requirements, and then you need to build yourself up to a position where you have enough reserves, particularly on the catastrophe risk management side of things. We definitely need it.
What do you consider a catastrophe?
A catastrophe is an event that takes place that is, in terms of return period, that is about 1 in 200 years or even more.
So what was 2 years ago? What was that called?
That was a lot, because...
it was a lot.
it was more than a 1 in 200 years.
I'm sure it was a lot, but what do you call it?
It's difficult because it needs to be calculated actuarially, but the fact that it was bigger than our reserves we had, which are calculated on 1 in 200 year event. So it means it was definitely one that is more than once in a 200 year event.
I need to say goodbye to you. So ahead of next year's elections, you're confident we're not going to see what we saw in July 2 years ago?
Touch wood, of course. I can't be quoted saying that nothing will happen, but I think based on history and based on what we're expecting something relatively similar to what we've been having over the past every 5 years for the past 40 years.
But not what we saw 2 years ago.
Absolutely
Certainly
not.
hope not. Muzi, thank you very much for coming in to speak to us. Still doing a very good job in keeping those involved with Sasria above float position as well. You can imagine how difficult it was for Sasria. I thank you, Executive Manager Muzi Dladla, for making time for me this evening here on ENCR.